I would like to welcome you all to the Thursday evening lecture series. And we have an exciting one tonight. It's going to be a very informative one, and I'm looking forward to this one myself. And I'd like to do a little bit of introductions here for the upcoming ones that we have offered. On June the 4th, we have Dixie's Daughters, the United Daughters of the Confederacy, and the Preservation of Confederate Culture, featuring Dr. Karen Cox. So that should be a very nice presentation. And a look back at Rock Spring Park, featuring Joe Com. And then on August the 6th, the Great Kanawha River and river transportation in West Virginia, featuring Sheri Sutphin. And then September the 10th, Hillside Fields, a history of sports in West Virginia, featuring Dr. Bob Barnett. And so we have quite a few upcoming programs, and we hope that you'll check out our website because it keeps you up to date on what we have coming up. And tonight's presentation will be entertaining and historical, so you can't beat that. So tonight we have author and columnist Sheri Brake, and she'll be presenting The Haunted History of the West Virginia Penitentiary. And she is, she's done a lot. She basically has appeared on the Travel Channel's Most Terrifying Places in America and the Discovery Channel's Ghost Lab. And she instructs classes on the paranormal at the New River Community and Technical College. And her preservation efforts is wonderful. She's a member of several historical and heritage societies. And she also is a Civil War reenactor. I won't go over the many things that she is involved with, because I tell you what, she is one of the most active people I know in preservation. So let's make welcome Sheri Brake.
How is everybody tonight? Good. Everybody came out. You didn't stay home and mow your grass tonight. It's such a beautiful evening. First of all, I want to thank Mr. Taylor and the staff here at the Archives Library for having me. Because this is kind of a controversial subject, right? Ghosts, the paranormal. It's something that almost my entire life I've been curious about it. I've been interested in it. As soon as I could read, I would pick up any book that I could get on subjects such as crop circles and UFOs and ESP and the pyramids in Egypt and all these wonderful subjects. And I'm glad to be here tonight with you to share a little bit of my, I don't want to say it's wisdom, let's just say it's research. I have a haunted tour company, and I have thousands of people that come with me on these overnight ghost hunts. So for many years, I have been collecting these files and just hoarding all of this evidence of the afterlife, and I love to blend it with history. So I'm very glad that everybody is here tonight. I'm not going to be stuck behind this podium. I'm going to move around a little bit because I'm real short anyway. I want y'all to see me. As you can see, this is the haunted history of the West Virginia State Penitentiary. And this was my third book. This came out last year. I did have a book that came out last December called The Fireside Folklore of West Virginia. And that covers everything from the Mothman to the headless ghost of Centralia, to the Greenbrier ghost. West Virginia is just full of wonderful folklore. Again, my name is Sheri Brake. I'm a paranormal researcher and investigator. What this means is that people will contact me and have me go into their homes to do some research. I'll do an investigation in homes, hotels. I've been in factories. I've been in multiple institutions, such as the old Weston State Hospital, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with. I'm also an author with 4 books under my belt so far, and a columnist. There is a wonderful publication that is put out into 17 counties throughout the state called Two Lane Living. And I've been a columnist with them for the last 2 years. I have several copies up here on the desk. If you're interested, please feel free to take one. I've worked on paranormal television, as Mr. Taylor said. Let me tell you, don't believe everything that you see on TV. After they edit in all those sound effects and all those ghostly images and things like that. Now, I'm not putting the television shows down, but you do have to understand it's all about ratings. As I said earlier, I'm a haunted history tour guide, and I own my own haunted history tour company called Haunted Heartland Tours. It's based out of Somersville. I like to say that I'm sandwiched in between the Greenbrier Ghost and the Flatwoods Green Monster. I'm also a member of various historical and heritage societies. I hope to be here in June when we have a presentation about the United Daughters of the Confederacy, because I am a member of the United Daughters of the Confederacy as well. I'm a Civil War reenactor, which would make me a Confederate reenactor, right? Just making sure everybody's awake. There's a photograph of my 4 books. The first book that I wrote was Haunted Stark County, and that's not in West Virginia, that's a Canton area. My folks were born in Webster Springs, and they moved up to Ohio back in the 1960s, like a lot of our parents and grandparents did back then. My second book was The Haunted History of the Ohio State Reformatory. Has anybody seen The Shawshank Redemption? Yes. That's a great movie. That is where that was filmed at. The next book up is, of course, The Haunted History of the West Virginia Pen. And then the final book off to the right there is Fireside Folklore. And the gentleman on that cover, I wish I could have met him. He was my second great-grandfather from Webster Springs in Webster County. I heard he was quite the storyteller, so I thought it was fitting to put his picture on that book. Now, where is the West Virginia Penitentiary? It's up north. It's up in the northern panhandle. You can see it on the map there where the arrow's at. It's located in the county of Marshall. You can see here I'm posed so cute-like out in front of the West Virginia Pen. One thing nice about doing tours at the penitentiary, you get to go and you get to leave. You don't have to do 15 to 20 there. Now, there have been many shows and documentaries that have been done on the West Virginia Pen. There's also been quite a few songs that have been written. And I have one of these here for you. I'm going to hopefully click on this little icon here, and it'll start playing. This is a band that's called Third Time. You might be familiar with them if you're into bluegrass music. And the song is called The Moundsville Pen. And if it doesn't work, then I just blame it on a ghost in the machine. We'll try it again here.
Sing it for us.
Sing it to you. I don't think you want to hear that. There we go. Third time's the charm. Let's take a listen.
Well, the devil shot girl is a hard man play. That's why I'm wearing this ball and chain. I shot your tailor, what all you say? Now doing time in the mountain field. The mountain field's gonna be my home. Got a lifetime job breaking up stone. You just look down and say to me, you spend your life.
write a prison song as long as you don't have to reenact it. Now, I have appeared on a few shows. A lot of the times when the paranormal TV show, people will contact me, I like to remain in the background. It's more fun to sit back there and watch all the antics happen out front. I did work with the folks from Ghost Hunters when they filmed in 2006 at the West Virginia Penitentiary. Also worked on a show called Paranormal State. Have any of you seen these shows? Yeah, okay, very good. Ghost Lab, I have to say, was probably the most fun I ever had. These two brothers, they don't really look tall in that photograph, but they're about 6'5", 6'8". When I worked with them at the penitentiary, they had to stand me up on a milk carton so I could appear in the same frame with them as they filmed. And I'm not sure how that got there. I've never filmed with Scooby-Doo, but that was one of my favorite cartoons growing up. As I said earlier, I'm a columnist for Tulane Living. My columns are all about West Virginia folklore, haunted locations, ghost stories, oddities throughout the state. West Virginia has such a long history, so much violence back in the frontier day, the Civil War battles that happened in the state of West Virginia, and the stories that have been handed down from generation to generation. I just love digging into that, and coming here to the library especially, and what a wonderful resource this is. Now, over the last 10 years doing tours, I have been able to take approximately 7,000 to 8,000 people into the West Virginia Pen alone. People are so excited to go to prison. I don't understand why. They love coming there, they love spending the night with me. I've instructed ghost hunting classes in the past, and I've also done a lot of bus trips. Things get crazy on a ghost bus tour, let me tell you. Now, when I first started putting the idea for the book together, I felt that Moundsville needed to be showcased, not just the penitentiary, but the entire history around that area. So, of course, one of the chapters had to be on the Grave Creek Mound, because that is where Moundsville got its name from. Now, originally, Moundsville was called Elizabethtown, and then it changed to Moundsville because of the Grave Creek Mound, which is almost directly across the street from the penitentiary. Now, the mound is not Native American Indian. It goes all the way back to the mound builders. So you're talking the Adena tribe back over 2,000 years ago. It's a very spiritual spot. And there are some paranormal researchers out there that believe that the Adena tribe could feel the energy. They were an ancient tribe and they could feel this earth energy, and that is why they built their mound in that sacred spot. Paranormal researchers believe that possibly the energy from that area is what is called a ley line. And that ley line runs through the West Virginia Penitentiary and can possibly fuel all the paranormal activity that happens there. Now, there was a great need for the state pen. On February 7th, 1866, the state legislature approved the purchase of the land in in Moundsville. I'm from Somersville. 10 acres were purchased just outside of the city limits for a total of $3,000. Now, the state capitol went back and forth between Wheeling and Charleston. So at the time, you're thinking, why in the world would they put a state penitentiary all up there in the northern panhandle? It's because it was only 12 miles away from Wheeling, and at that time, Wheeling was the state capital. The building of the pen. As you can see, the prison on the left looks a lot like the prison on the right. The prison on the left is in Illinois, and that was the model for the building of the West Virginia Pen in Moundsville. It was the Joliet Penitentiary. Now, the Joliet prison is twice the size of Moundsville. The photograph on the right shows Moundsville in 1867, and it was built by inmate labor. Not only were you a prisoner and incarcerated, but you had to build this gigantic fortress as well. The stone architecture is Gothic in nature. When you drive up, you pull up in front of that prison, you know that they meant business when they built that. It looks like a grand castle. Now, it's situated on 10 acres. As you can see here, this is a very basic map. You You've got off to the right, which is the south yard, and off to the left is the north yard. It sits on 10 acres of land. It's about 5 city blocks long by 3 city blocks wide. When it officially opened up, they only had 251 inmates. But in the 1960s, that went to well over 2,000. And that's when it started to become overcrowded. If you go to visit the penitentiary, that nifty little arrow that just popped up, that's where you enter. So you got a good idea. If you ever go to visit, you're almost directly in the center part of the prison. This is the good stuff. Many inmates believed that if you died in prison, your soul stayed in prison. You were trapped there. You'd been incarcerated. Your freedoms had been taken away from you. So therefore, in the afterlife, you had nowhere to go but right there. Now, anybody know a reason why a place like this could be haunted? I listed a few for you. It's because of the fear, the hate, the anger, the loneliness. All of this energy gets in the atmosphere, and it stays in the atmosphere. And that is what researchers like myself investigate for. We're all about the paranormal energy. There was so much death in this prison. Death from disease, from illness, from being abused. People died from old age. They were put there for life. Murder, suicides, executions. It's a perfect recipe for hauntings. Causes of hauntings or paranormal activity: sudden death. There were inmates there who had their heads shoved down into buckets of mop water, and they died. There were men that were shoved off the different tiers and fell to their death on the concrete below. Inmates would sit for hours in their cells and they would make shank, which was just a homemade type of a weapon. You could sit there with a toothbrush. You could drag it along the floor for hours and make a very sharp point, enough to go into somebody's neck and cause death. Ghosts stick around for different reasons. Sudden death, violent death. They don't realize that they have passed on. Psychics love this one. Psychics say unsolved issues is the reason why a lot of spirits stay behind. Stubbornness. You guys can probably relate to this. You got a grandpa or a grandma, somebody in your family that's just so stubborn. They built that house, they lived in that house, and after they pass on, by golly, they're going to stay there. Stubbornness. And fear. Fear of passing on, of not knowing what lies beyond. Take a look at that. Is that not imposing? When you pull up and you see that building, it's enough to make goosebumps on your arms and the hair stand up on the back of your neck. It's so haunted that many, many television shows have come there and filmed. Here's a list of them. A&E's Paranormal State, MTV's Fear filmed there in 2000. They took 6 college students and made them stay there for 3 days. And I think only 2 or 3 ended up coming out from that. Sci-Fi has had multiple shows that they filmed there, and Travel Channel's Ghost Adventures as well is filmed there. It has some pretty horrific nicknames. Bloody Alley. Bloody Alley was the name that the inmates gave the prison. Hell on Earth. A newspaper in Cincinnati, Ohio, did an article in 1886 on the penitentiary and said that it was hell on earth. There were torture devices that had been found on a recent raid. Now in that building, 998 murders and suicides, those are documented. That's after they got into prison. 85 hangings took place, 9 electrocutions. These guys really had the work cut out for them. These were some of the first guards, and this photograph was taken in 1866. Now, it would take a very strong individual to go into a prison like that and handle these men. You had good guards, and you had bad guards, just like you had good wardens, and you had bad wardens. Cruel torture devices had been fabricated, and they were used. This is just not gossip. These were things that were actually found on a raid. The kicking Jenny was used. That's this device over here on the right. They would take the inmate, they would strip him naked, they would lay him across this device. It was almost like a saddle. And they would tie his hands and his arms and his legs down below, and they would whip him with a cat-o'-nine-tail whip. It's got 9 pieces of leather on it, and if you passed out, they didn't care. They grabbed a bucket of ice-cold water, they threw it on you, and they would beat you again. Waterboarding was also pretty popular back then. They would tie you up against a wall and have a very large hose with a high amount of water coming out of that, and you practically would drown. Now, they were very industrial. They had a lot of buildings that sat out behind the main penitentiary building. They had a whip factory. Now, how bad is that? You probably got whipped by a whip that you probably made. A wagon factory that built wagons, broom factory, clothing factory, dairy farm. They had coal mines. Anything that they needed, they could get out of the vegetable garden or from the dairy farm. They had a laundry. They even made their own soap there. This is one of the buildings that has been torn down that sat out behind the main building of the penitentiary. Now, as I said, when the pen opened up in 1866, they had about 200 inmates. Into the 1960s, you start getting 2,000, 2,200, 2,500 inmates. The cells became very crowded. They didn't have 1 person in them. They didn't have 2. They had 3. They would throw a little twin-size mattress on the floor, and the 3rd person would lay on that mattress. This is a photograph, a historical one, of men on the yard back in 1914. Women were there as well. Who'd have thunk it? This is a picnic. They got to go on picnics. This is a 1920s picnic with women inmates. Now, women did stay at the prison up until about the 1940s, and then there was another prison that they were moved to. So they were moved off-site. This is a typical photograph of a typical woman's cell. Do you see the doilies? There's doilies, and there's flowers, and there's beautiful paintings on the wall. I mean, I think they got a little preferential treatment for the most part. Now, there is one serial killer, who's very famous, whose mother ended up doing time at the West Virginia Pen. Charles Manson. Now, a lot of people in some of these television shows will tell you Charles Manson was an inmate. He was not an inmate. What was even worse, his mother was an inmate there. Now, she didn't exactly give the best atmosphere for Charles to be raised in. I had read one account where she actually sold Charles when he was a baby for a pitcher of beer. Okay, her grandparents and her mother had several partners. All the children had different parents, different fathers, so he really didn't have the best life. If you were an inmate, a female inmate at the prison, guess what? You had to cook and you had to clean. You couldn't just be an inmate. You had jobs to do, just like a housewife. Legend says that Charles Manson's mother, her job was to clean up under the hanging scaffold after a hanging took place. Can you imagine? Horrific. Now, there is a famous inmate who ended up doing a lot of good. His name was Mr. Earl Dudding. He was the founder of the Prisoners Relief Society after he got out of the penitentiary. See, he was a West Virginia businessman. He was from Huntington, and he ended up getting framed for a murder. They sentenced him into the penitentiary at Moundsville, and the warden even greeted him at the front door and said, "I know that you should not be here. We're going to try to make the best of this while you're here." So they removed Mr. Dudding from the general population and put him into the hospital, and he worked there as a hospital aide. Now, he was there for about 5 years in prison. After he was paroled, he wrote a book. And the book was all about reform for the prisons. It was called The Trail of the Dead Years, published in 1932. You're going to love this subtitle. Look at that. Dudding's gripping story of his own life experience is stranger than fiction, truer than life, sadder than death, more triumphant than fame and fortune. Illuminating and startling are his theories of the chemistry of sin, crime, punishment, birth control. I don't know what that's in there for. The land of eternal dreams and numerous other vital subjects. Can you imagine doing a Google search on that? Yeah, try Trail of the Dead Years. Escapes, you betcha. There were hundreds of escapes. You had nothing better to do than to sit around for 22, 23 hours in your cell and think about how to get back out there. You had hours to come up with all of these schemes. But the people that designed the pen knew that in advance. So some of the walls are actually 5 feet thick. And they taper up to 2.5 feet up at the top. But people did tunnel out. Can you imagine how dedicated you would have to be to tunnel through stone? There were 510 successful attempts between 1960 and 1995. One guy stole a truck, another guy hid in a cement mixer, and 2 guys, one was a coal miner and the other was an electrician, and they were in a cell together, and they dug out. Their tunnel was beautiful, the guards said. It had lighting, it had fans for good air circulation. After that, they tried not to put a coal miner and an electrician together in a cell. Now the photograph down here at the bottom might be a little difficult to see, but this is actually broken vents that an inmate broke through to escape through a roof fan house. This was back in 1975. Picture up here. Did you know you can use dental floss to cut through metal bars? Can you imagine? Hours and hours and hours and hours. Well, there are some of the instruments down here below. This is called shank. These are tools that you would not necessarily think you could be turned into something to hurt somebody with. A toothbrush, a comb, anything at all that you could pick off of the wall, because you see the cells were all made of metal. You could sit there for hours and work a little piece of steel off of your bunk and get some masking tape and make a handle out of the masking tape and stab somebody with it. If you did manage to escape, chances are this guy with the bloodhounds would be hot on your trail. One guy by the name of Fast Freddy, I love this story. He escaped 13 times from the prison. Every single time he escaped, he would write a postcard and mail it to the warden. I would love to see a movie on this guy. And on the postcard, wish you were here. Now, that would be a thorn in your side. Now, to talk about the wardens would take a whole evening. There were so many good wardens at the prison. In my book, The Haunted History of the Penitentiary, I have a multitude of stories about the inmates as well as the wardens. This photograph here was taken in about 1928. These 3 wardens are Wardens White, Terrell, and Smith, and they served the warden, or they served the penitentiary in the capacity of warden from 1914 to 1927. After a very bloody riot took place on site, they decided that it probably wasn't a good idea to keep the wardens and the warden's family in the building. You see, because the center part of the prison, right here, is where the warden lived with his family. And if a riot would break out, there could be a chance that somebody could come in there and get to the family. So after the last riot, they decided to build a beautiful warden's home, which is just around the block from the prison today. And that is where the warden and the family stayed. This is another one of the beautiful buildings that's no longer there. This is the prison chapel in 1914. Men could gather there for services, no matter what religion. After the building was torn down, there was a new non-denominational chapel that is still standing today, that was built and is on the grounds. Now, for entertainment purposes, they would have boxing matches. People from all over the state would come down there and watch the inmates box. What better fun? They had baseball games, basketball games, anything. Running matches. They had bands. They had a prison band. They even had their own prison radio station, WVPEN. Pretty original. Now, they did teach you a trade. They had the clothing factory, they had the broom making factory. They tried to, if you couldn't read, they instructed you on how to read. These are photographs, these are historical photographs of actual inmates at the prison learning a trade. Now, probably one of the most active areas in the prison, besides the boiler room and the sugar shack and the medical infirmary, would have to be the wagon gate area. This is the oldest part of the prison. They actually brought wagons of inmates through there. That's why it's called the wagon gate. Today, as you can see on the picture off to the left, the trap door is still there. It's said that the very first hangings of the penitentiary took place inside the wagon gate area. When you go there on a day tour, they'll take you out there and show it to you. For a while, they had a little body that would drop out of those trap doors. It was very dramatic, especially when the school children were there coming in for their field trip, and they would pull the lever, boom, and down came a body. Everybody woke up. But it has been a very active area for ghosts and for spirits. This is the building today. Now, one of the ghosts that is believed to exist in this area is the ghost of an inmate, Orville Adkins. Mr. Adkins was an inmate, and he had the opportunity of being dropped twice. The first time that it happened, I think they miscalculated his weight and the rope broke and he hit the concrete floor below. No compassion here. They picked him up, put him on a stretcher, took him back up the steps and hung him again. Frank Heyer, another inmate, had worse luck. In 1931 he was hung, actually decapitated him. They misjudged his weight. The doctor's report said he had a rather spongy neck, and when they dropped him, it decapitated him. That was the last time that the public would be invited. Didn't look good on the penitentiary to have something like that happen, because you could come there. There were people in the neighborhood that could actually see these hangings take place because they would climb up on the bleachers and look over the walls, and they could see these inmates being hung. It was big entertainment. Now, there is a prison cemetery, and I'll talk more about that in a minute, but I do have a photograph here of Frank Heyer, the one that was decapitated. He was from Pocahontas County. He was sent there for murder, and he was executed June 19th of 1931. Another interesting individual is Hugh Bragg. Now, you really don't hear too much about Hugh Bragg. He's not one of the popular inmates. I found his story interesting because, as you can see from this photograph, the lower portion of his legs are missing. He evaded police capture. I'm not sure how he did that. Now, he was famous for writing bad checks in Webster County. Sheriff Morton approached him, came to the house on a beautiful afternoon, and apparently Hugh Bragg escalated the matter a little bit, grabbed a shotgun and killed Sheriff Morton. Killed him dead. He was wanted for killing the sheriff, and he was executed only 3 months and 3 days after they had taken him to the penitentiary. This photograph was not taken at the pen. It was taken at the Webster Springs Jail, the Webster County Jail, and a photograph of Sheriff Morton there. I just really wonder, how could you evade police capture? I'm not sure how he could have done that. A famous character here. This is Harry Powers. He was known as the Bluebeard of Quietdale. Now, Quietdale is just outside of Clarksburg. And back in the 1930s, this gentleman appeared to be kind of dapper. I mean, he'd be a good catch for you, right? He appeared to have some money. What he would do is he would advertise in magazines all across the nation that he was looking for a wife. This guy was psychotic. All of these women would show up in Quietdale, and they would bring their children to meet him. He would kill them, and he would bury them out next to his garage. Now, he ended up being the inspiration for a book that came out in 1953 called The Night of the Hunter. And then there was a 1955 film that came out with the same name. So there you have a little bit about Harry Powers, the Bluebeard of Quietdale. Speaking of electrocutions, this is Old Sparky. It was built by Paul Glenn, who just happened to be an inmate at the pen. I don't think he had very many friends after this. They removed him from the general population. This chair is a beautiful piece of furniture if you can get past the fact that people actually died in it. 9 electrocutions, the last one being in 1959. If you were executed or if you died in prison and nobody claimed your body, what are they going to do with your body? They had their very own prison cemetery about 4 miles away from the pen. The interesting thing is you have to walk through a little river to get over to it. And if the water's up, it can be pretty cold too. Now the cemetery is about the size of a football field, and there are several hundred men that are buried there. They don't have headstones. They have license plates. You know why? They made license plates at the penitentiary. You'll notice on this one photograph that there is no name on that. I'm sure that there's a story behind that. Can't find anybody that will talk about it there. There were multiple riots that took place in the penitentiary. And again, we could talk for hours about some of this history. 1973, 40 convicts held 5 guards hostage. The more bloody of the riots was the 1986 New Year's Day riot that took place. Now the prisoners had been planning that because they knew there would be a lot of call-offs on New Year's Day. Everybody would be celebrating the night before. It started in the dining room at dinner time, and it escalated. Now these prisoners wanted demands met. They were living in filthy conditions. There were rats everywhere. Raw sewage was coming in and flowing throughout some of the cells. The food was terrible. It had maggots and worms in it. So there really was a lot of requests that needed to be met. For 53 hours, 16 prison staff were held as hostages. If you get a chance, if you don't buy the book, don't worry about buying the book, but check the book out here and read. There's some fascinating first-hand accounts of the riots as they took place from different newspapers that covered it. Now, one thing that you'll notice when you walk throughout the prison, not only were you in your cell for 22, 23 hours a day, but you could get Sharpie markers, you could get paints, and you could decorate your cells. So as you walk into these cells, you can definitely tell what kind of music these people listen to. Because in one cell you'll have David Allan Coe music, in another cell you'll have some Patsy Cline lyrics. There are drawings, some of them X-rated, some of them rather graphic. Here's some cartoons. I'm glad there are no children present. Now, if you go down into the bottom part of the prison, one of my favorite areas to investigate is called the Sugar Shack. Now, it wasn't called the Sugar Shack because they gave you candy bars there. It was called the Sugar Shack because of all the homosexual activity that took place. Okay. Not a good place to be, not a good place to hang out. This was actually the indoor recreation room for the men. If it was too bad outside, they would bring you in. There were pool tables there. You could have a good old time. The artwork on the wall here that looks like the Mothman, it wasn't painted by an inmate. When MTV came in and filmed the show Fear, they brought spray paint and paints, and they painted without permission on federal property. So they'll never be permitted back on site again because of that. And it is rather eerie. If you go down into the basement, the Sugar Shack, and you just have a flashlight, and you're standing there in a dark room, and your beam hits that Mothman, you do a step backwards. One of the most active areas is North Hall. North Hall was a location where if you murdered somebody in the prison after you were an inmate, they took you and put you into North Hall. It was maximum security within maximum security. This was for the bad, bad men, the men who could not play well with others. As you look at this, you can tell they were like caged like animals. Here's a notorious inmate for you from Kanawha County. William Red Snyder, called Red because of his red hair. Red was a member of the gang after he was incarcerated. Now they had Black Panthers, they had Hell's Angels, they had the Aryan Brotherhood, the Aryan Nation. And Red Snyder was the leader of the Aryan Nation after he was behind bars. Now Red cut up his father and put him in a suitcase. After a couple of weeks, the neighbors started complaining. Must have lived in an apartment complex or something, but police came, they found the suitcase, they stuck him into prison, and that's where he sat. Until 1992. In 1992, Red started to exit his cell at the same time as Rusty Lassiter was exiting his cell 2 doors down. Rusty had made a homemade knife, a shank, ran over and stabbed Red Snyder 37 times. And they said that the blood ran like a river there in the area right out in front of his cell. This is his cell. You can step in there today, and you'll know that you're in Red Snyder's cell because of the writing on the wall. Aryan Brotherhood. Okay. This is a cell where when people step in, they get a headache. They get nauseated. They feel as if they can't take a deep breath of air. There's a psychic that's very well known by the name of Chip Coffey. He's been on a lot of these television shows. Paranormal Kids was one show that he was on quite often, and so was Paranormal State. He stepped in there and he passed out behind the bunk. Just said he couldn't handle the energy, that it just knocked him down. Another inmate, notorious inmate, Danny Lehman. And you can see a little faded picture over here of Danny Lehman. Danny was a very gifted artist. He did this beautiful painting near River Gorge Bridge. It's huge. It's probably about 6 foot long, probably 3.5 feet tall. It's on display. Throughout the prison, there's a lot of beautiful wildlife paintings, and he signed them all. He was very gifted. But, like any inmate, he had a dark side. He was a member of the Avenger biker gang. You know, just a big, badass guy. Didn't have a lot of friends. Somebody jumped him and had an ice pick type of a tool, shoved it right into his eye socket, and he hemorrhaged and he died several days later. His cell is a very active area. Now, how do you know that you're in Danny Lehman's cell? Well, if you step in there, you're going to see this. He must have liked the Rolling Stones, because that's one of the symbols for the Rolling Stones. It's on a lot of their albums. In the cell, we get some really unusual photographs, such as this. The one on the right is of me, and you can see the lips and the mouth and the tongue back there behind me. The photograph off to the left is paranormal. This was taken with no flash. We had our ghost hunting equipment out. We had meters, ghost hunting meters that we use that show when there's energy around us, and we pop off a couple of photographs, and that's what we captured. People have actually captured voices in there on their recorders as well. The Sugar Shack. Oh yeah, this is one of the great places to go down to. Everybody's always anxious to get down there into the Sugar Shack area. Again, it was the recreation room where the inmates could go. They had a jukebox, they could dance, they could do whatever they wanted to because the line of vision from the guards was not very clear in that building. As you can see, there were very large piers down in the basement area that these inmates could hide behind. And nobody ever was murdered in the Sugar Shack, but there were quite a few fights that took place there. A good friend of mine, who is a tour guide, her name is Lori O'Neill. Lori and her husband were down in the Sugar Shack area one night, and they had just walked through, and as they were coming back out to go upstairs, their flashlight went over into the corner. They were both holding flashlights. Flashlight goes over into the corner, and they see a man standing there with a shovel in gray clothing. They turned to look at each other to say, "Do you see that?" And when they put their flashlight back over into the corner, nobody was there. I think that's pretty cool. That might frighten some people. The psychiatric ward. You'll know that you're in the psychiatric ward because the walls are painted a beautiful pink color to make you feel better. Of course, they did experimental treatments there, just as they did at any other facility in the nation. We really didn't know what we were doing back then in the old days of psychiatric medicine. There were all kinds of treatments that were done to these inmates that weren't necessary. They did do lobotomies. They did wrap the inmates up in sheets and put them in bathtubs and fill it up with icy cold water and would let them lay there for sometimes 15, 20 minutes, and it would calm them down. You ever heard the term chill out? Now you know the rest of the story. This is one of our paranormal photographs that we took in the prison. This is in the psychiatric ward. We're standing there taking photographs. There's nothing around us. All of a sudden, our electromagnetic frequency meters go off, our ghost meters go off, and it tells us that there's some type of energy. We pop off a photograph, and Nicole captured this mist moving up above the ground. It's pretty cool. This is another picture that we captured. This is in the dental area, and yes, they did clean inmates' teeth, and they checked for cavities, and they had physicals that they did. This room in particular draws people like no other room up there on the second story. All kinds of unusual things have happened. People have seen shadows out of the corner of their eyes up here, and they've heard voices, and we've got energy on film. Now, I blocked out the faces of these lovely girls and their mother that were visiting on a daytime tour. The husband went to snap the photograph, and directly behind them, just this tall white mist thing appeared. Now this was taken in the North Hall area. This is one of the most active areas. Another area that is very famous, if you've ever watched Taft's Ghost Hunters on TV, the big show where they did at the West Virginia Penitentiary, this is the cafeteria hallway. It looks innocent enough. But the year before that, the Shadow Man photograph was captured. Polly Gear took this picture. She was standing 110 feet away from this doorway. I interviewed her personally. She told me that as she was walking down that hallway away from the door, she kept feeling as if somebody was watching her. And she would turn with her flashlight and she would say, "Anybody there?" And there was nobody there. She'd walk a few more feet and she just felt like something was back there, and she would turn and she saw a shadow move. She walked a few more feet, had her camera ready. When she heard noises, she turned, took this photograph, and captured the Shadow Man. Now he's been seen in different locations. What is a Shadow Man? Nobody really knows. Nobody really knows. There's not much definition to them. You can tell that it's a man, or you can tell that it's a child when you see it. Typically, you see it out of the corner of your eyes. It's very rare to see a Shadow Man directly head on. You see it out of the corner of your eyes, and then when you turn and you look, there's nobody there. It's very common. The boiler room. This is one of my favorite places. You guys didn't like that because you've been to the prison. Not comfortable there? You heard somebody call your name? The boiler room is an interesting area. It's directly underneath the administration building, and it housed the boilers for the prison. Inside the boiler room, it's a maze of rooms. Now, there was an inmate by the name of R.D. Wall. R.D. was a snitch. He was the warden's snitch, which meant that he would run to the warden every single time he knew a little tidbit of information that would be beneficial. So the warden pulled him out of the general population for his own good and put him into the boiler room to manage the boilers. Well, that's all good and well because you're out of the general population. Nobody can hurt you, right? Think again. Some guards were paid off, and several inmates came down and caught R.D. Wall on the toilet, right here, chased him around throughout the maze of those rooms, and ended up basically butchering him to death with homemade knives. Now, if you've ever watched any of the paranormal television shows, they say that R.D. Wall was decapitated. He was not. He was cut to ribbons, but he was not decapitated. If you go downstairs and turn off all of your lights and stand there in the darkness, I guarantee you'll know that you're not alone. You can feel something in that area. I don't know if it's in the air itself, but you feel a presence, a heaviness. This is one of our unusual photographs that we got. Jody Ivy took this picture. She said she just had a funny feeling. She'd been sitting there in the boiler room for a while, took a photograph, and captured this mist that you cannot explain. Nobody smokes inside the building because it's a federal penitentiary. It's state property. So that is not cigarette smoke, and fog does not form inside of a room. Well, before we get to those, this is where I had my encounter. Now, as a paranormal researcher and investigator, I'm skeptic, right? Not everything's haunted. Not everything is a ghost. Most of the time, you can disprove things. Well, I was setting up for a ghost hunting class at the penitentiary one afternoon. Voices from beyond. And I was doing a general walkthrough of the property, and I had gone down into the boiler room. I walked around. As I was coming up, getting ready to come right in through here, I'm looking ahead, and it's still daylight. All of a sudden, I see a tall, dark shadow that blocked out the daylight and went around the corner. And I thought, aha, that is my friend, my other tour guide, Lori, who was upstairs, because we're the only two in the prison. Lori is going to try to jump out and scare me, but I'm going to get one over on her. So I go running around the corner to jump and grab her, and there's nobody there. That got my attention. Other things that I've had happen to me personally in the prison, I've had my hair pulled. I've heard a voice in my ear. I've had a hand touch me in the middle of my back while I was in a cell and all alone. I'm not the only one experiencing this. Thousands of people come to the penitentiary every year to explore it. This gentleman came on one of my tours, and he was a little bit cocky with me at the beginning of the night. Big, tall guy. He goes, I don't know if I believe in any of this stuff. He said, I'm going to go someplace and I'm going to ask for some proof. I said, well, just be careful what you ask for. I said, please don't taunt. Don't go off and stand in the middle of the room and say, throw a chair at me. Prove that you're here. You don't need that to happen. Well, about a half an hour later, I hear someone screaming my name, running up the corridor with a flashlight in his hand. And who is it? This big, tall guy. And he turns to me and he pulls up his t-shirt and he says, oh my gosh, my back is on fire, my neck's on fire. I said, did you fall down? He said, no. He said, I did what you told me not to do. He said, I was down in the boiler room and I was taunting. He said, and I was standing and my back was towards the wall and I was saying, prove yourself, prove yourself. And he said, then all of a sudden, my skin started burning. He said, am I bleeding? And I said, you've got some scratch marks on your back. I said, maybe you scratched yourself. And he's like, no, look at my nails. Look at my nails. I don't have any fingernails. The rest of the night, he sat out in the gift shop. He didn't want anything to do with going anywhere else. So I'd say he learned his lesson. Now, another area of the prison that has a lot of activity is the South Hall area, the new wall section. It's right there where the purple arrow is at. The South Wall area is an interesting place because when you come and you do their Halloween tour in October, they will put you in those cells and close the door on you. What a treat. 3 ladies stepped into a cell a couple of Octobers ago. They thought it was all just harmless fun. They stepped into the cell doors slammed shut, and they all started laughing until one of the ladies turned on her flashlight and started to look around in the cell. Standing back in the corner was a man wearing a gray overalls. They screamed. They got out of there, and I don't think they ever went back because they definitely were in a cell with somebody that was not human. Here's another notorious inmate. I love this story. This is Holly Griffith. He was convicted for murder. He murdered Constable Goff in Ward County, West Virginia, and also Officer Thompson, Braxton County. They put out a reward for his arrest. $600 was a lot of money back in the day. Everybody was after this guy. I mean, he was a pretty good-looking guy. He was 25 years of age. He was 6 foot tall, 170 pounds, had a wife, really had things going, and decided to pass some bad checks, which kind of snowballed into murdering some law enforcement. He ended up being sent to the prison. The reason that he's a popular inmate is because there was a movie that was loosely based on his life story called Fool's Parade. The book came out in 1969, the movie came out in 1971, Jimmy Stewart was in it. Jimmy Stewart was in Moundsville. Boy, that was a big deal. George Kennedy and Kurt Russell, when Kurt Russell was really, really young. I actually bought the VHS of this. You can't find it in print anywhere. I bought the VHS tape on eBay, so that is someplace that you could look into getting it. Now, the penitentiary eventually had to close. Those cells were deemed inhumane. This is my daughter. I drug her along on a tour. She was hamming it up for the camera, of course. She's like, these cells are so small. I said, yeah, they are. They're 5 foot by 7 foot. You would have 2 men in there, sometimes 3. Now this is a padded cell. This is why there are no bunks in there and there's no toilet facilities. The facility ended up being ranked on the Justice Department's list of the top 10 most violent correctional facilities in America, even above Alcatraz. Now Alcatraz only has 300 and some cells. There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of cells at the West Virginia Pen. If you visit the pen and you step into their museum, you can see a noose hanging up. It's on display. There's a lot of symbolism with those nooses. Did you know that there are 13 knots on the noose? 12 were for the jury, and 1 was to represent the judge. Back in the old days, when they would do the executions, before the penitentiary was built, they did them out in front of the local county jails. Every county had a jail or had a meeting area, and that's where they would build the scaffolding for their hangings. And they would typically have 13 steps to go up the scaffolding. So symbolism there as well. What does the penitentiary do for funding now? They have daytime tours. They take school bus kids through there. Schools show up with busloads of children. They actually had a wedding. I'm partially to blame for that. We had a gentleman and his lady, and they got married out in front of the penitentiary. They both wore black. It was the second wedding. I would say they're probably in their late 30s. And they were going to ghost hunt with us on their honeymoon. Isn't that cool? So what do you get as a gift for people that want to do something like that? I found a beautiful white ring pillow, you know, like the little ring bearers would carry, and I put black roses on it, and I sewed some handcuffs on it for them. So as far as funding, they do have several things that they do throughout the year. They have the annual mock riot that takes place in May. They have thousands of people that come, law enforcement, that come from all over the world, that come to the West Virginia Pen, and they try out new weapons and new types of tactical devices and things like that. That happens in May. Every September, and you gotta love this, zombies are so hot right now. They have the annual Moundsville Zombie Walk. There was like 3,000 people that showed up and did the zombie walk, and they stopped out in front of the penitentiary and they broke out into the Michael Jackson Thriller dance. Anything for tourism. Every October, there is the Dungeon of Horrors that takes place at the pen. How interesting is it to have a haunted house inside of a haunted building? I think that would probably add to the effect. Now, as a paranormal investigator, I have found that my ghost hunts at the prison in November are very, very active. The reason I think is because in October, they have about 20,000 people that come through that haunted house. They're screaming. All that energy is out there, and I think that just fuels up the spirits and the ghosts for when we come back in November. The end. There's so much to talk about with the penitentiary. I'd actually like to come back and do another presentation on the pen, because you could talk for hours about that building. It's such a wonderful draw for tourism. It also benefits a lot of youth groups. There was a gentleman who was an inmate at the prison. His name was John. And he had robbed a man in Somersville at a gas station. And they sent him to Huttonsville. And at the age of 18, he incited a riot at the facility in Huttonsville, so they took him to the big house. As he approached the penitentiary, he told me, he says, when I saw that prison and those castle-like turrets and that big stone building, I thought, I'm not going in there and they can't make me. They did make him. And he said he cried like a baby the first night that he was there. He pulled up that scratchy wool blanket that they give all the inmates, and he laid there and he cried and he cried and he cried. He turned to demonology. He turned to devil worship. He would send out through the mail, and he would get booklets from this gentleman out in, I shouldn't call him a gentleman, from this man out in California who was said to be able to help him channel the devil. And John would sit on his top bunk, and he would shout through the vent system so everybody could hear him throughout that cell block. And he would try to channel the devil. The guards were afraid of him. The inmates were afraid of him. He escaped 3 times from the prison and was brought back. He lost weight, and he would collect butter packets at dinner time. Everybody thought he loved butter, so they would always give him his butter packets. He would grease his body down, and he had lost so much weight that he could slip through a hole in his cell about the size of a legal pad. He had sat for hours and scraped with a piece of metal until he could carve out that hole. He would butter himself up, slide through that hole, and he would go down in under North Hall and tunnel dirt out. He tunneled through rock and dirt for about 45 feet and ended up escaping. They brought him back time and time again. He found God, he married, and he started his own church, which is still a church today in Burnsville, West Virginia. And he brings youth back up to the prison to show them this is the wrong path. You need to do the right. Isn't that a great story? That sounds like a movie. Should be a made-for-television movie. I'd like to go ahead and close right now because I'm sure somebody has something to share or ask. Be not ye afraid. But it is on loan. It's being leased from the state.
Every November that people go there.
You can take tours from April through November. You can do daytime tours. Our ghost hunts that we do usually run from April into November as well, because the prison is not heated. It would cost a pretty penny to heat it, and it gets bitterly cold in the wintertime.
Yeah, we'll just go onto your website and check it out.
I hope to see you.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Yes.
There was a kid in the room during that cartoon scene.
What was it? I'm sorry.
There was a woman on the wall who said that
Oh.
your mom is
Yes, yes. But you're mature. You're mature.
Not really.
You won't have nightmares tonight, will you? Good. That's very good. Yes, in the back.
Yeah, why, and I've always wondered this, like, with those ghost hunter shows. I mean, with the shows, I guess I understand it, because it's for dramatic effect and stuff. I'm kind of a cynic, to be completely honest.
Skeptic. Yes.
Skeptic, yeah.
Yes. That's good.
But why are the lights always off? Like, you'd think, like, if I was going into a haunted place, like, turn on the lights, man.
All right. There's a couple.
Seriously, I mean, I was just
You would be
wondering.
the guy on my tour to sit out by the gift shop, I'm sure.
Yeah.
No, I understand what you're asking. The reason why most of us like to do investigations and ghost hunts at night is because it's quieter.
Okay.
Most normal people are in bed. There's less noise on the airwaves, so if we're trying to record electronic voice phenomena or voices,
Okay.
there's not going to be that much interference out there on the airwaves. And also, our equipment that we use has all kinds of bells and whistles, all kinds of lights on it. And it's really hard to see the equipment if you're outside in bright daylight.
Okay.
But if somebody calls me up and says, hey, I have a ghost in my house and we see her every morning at 9:30, I'm not going to go there at night. I'm going to go there, at 9:30 and see if anything happens. I'm skeptic, but I'm open-minded.
Right.
Not everything is haunted. Not everything has ghostly activity, but there is enough out there that I see to keep me going from year to year to year with this.
Right.
And I've been doing investigations for 30 years now. Way back when you didn't talk about it, because they would, kick you out of town.
Yeah.
My husband said the other day, he said, do you know if you were doing what you're doing now 100 years ago, they would probably burn you at the stake. Or at least put me in Weston, which is a nice point to bring up because my next book that I'm working on is on the Weston State Hospital, which is now called the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum, which is quite a mouthful. Yes?
the mound that was built there across from the prison by the ancients,
Yes.
what did they use it for? I mean, most mounds are like burial mounds.
Yes, there were skeletons inside the mound, at the Grave Creek Mound. There were some tablets that were found. There was some beads, some bottles, some jewelry, things like that. The mound really wasn't protected for a long period of time in West Virginia history. There were people that would go over there and they would just dig away with a shovel to see what they could find. I saw a photograph the other day that somebody built a tavern up on top of the mound and actually had a bar up there. Now, can you imagine doing the walk all the way up there and then having to do the walk all the way down? There was a small amusement park that was built around the mound too. There was a Ferris wheel and some rides and things like that. So it was unprotected for quite a long time. And now, of course, it's very protected. You could go to the archaeology complex there, the museum, and they actually let you walk up on top of the mound. Which is pretty cool. Yes?
Someone from my hometown was murdered in that prison riot. His name was Atkinson. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, a little bit. Yes, I am.
And he's buried there.
He's buried out in the cemetery. The cemetery is called Whitegate Cemetery. And a lot of the people that weren't claimed, such as the ones that passed in the riots or any of the uprisings, were buried out there. It is interesting when you go to the cemetery, because you see those license plates. Some of the graves are actually hollowed out, like somebody came and took the body, and the dirt's caved in it. I mean, it's kind of eerie out there. The reason that the prison cemetery is not on site is because there is a law that says that no inmate can be buried within the city limits. So that's why they were taken out there to Tom's Run, is the name of the road that's on. And you have to wear some boots when you go out there because they're crossing through the creek. It's not your typical cemetery. Yes?
What were you saying about the November tours?
November ghost hunts seem to be much more active. A lot of the buildings that we go into to do our overnight ghost hunts have haunted houses in them in October. And people come through. The Ohio State Reformatory is one building. They have about 35,000 people that come to the Reformatory in Ohio in the month of October, specifically to walk through the haunted house. So I think it's all that energy, all that excitement, people come in there and want to go through the haunted house, and then that energy kind of energizes the spirits and the ghosts that are already there. It's all about energy. And it's a little colder in November too, so you gotta bundle up. Yes?
So what was it that generated your interest in paranormal activity?
Well, that's a good question. When I was about 2 years old, I had an imaginary playmate. I was living in Canton, Ohio, of course, with my mom and dad, just a couple years old, and I remember sitting underneath the kitchen table, and there was a gentleman that sat underneath the kitchen table with me, but nobody else could see him. So I nicknamed him Lurch. Do you remember the television show? All right, with Lurch, a big tall guy in a suit with a shocky white-gray hair. That's exactly who he looked like. So I would sit underneath the kitchen table and I would talk to Lurch. And he appeared for, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 months. Later on in life, as I'm researching about children with imaginary playmates, I find out that many researchers believe that if you've got a child that talks to an imaginary playmate, it's not an imaginary playmate they're talking to. They're actually talking to a ghost or a spirit that they can see, but you can't. So that kind of piqued my interest a little bit. As soon as I could learn to read, I got my hands on any type of book I could on the mysterious and on ghosts and castles in England that were haunted and read about it. Being a Civil War reenactor, I was always the one that got picked on at reenactments to stand around the fire in my garb and with my lantern, and I would tell ghost stories. And I had such a good time doing it, absolutely loved it, that I decided that I was going to start my own haunted history walk in Ohio. And I thought, well, I was working in nursing at the time in a hospital, and I thought, well, I'll just do this once and see if anybody even shows up. So I built a little website, $10 a person, $1 goes back to the local historical society. You know, I thought it'd be great. Everybody meet me on a street corner and we'll walk throughout this quaint little town. And I'll tell you about the ghosts and about the history. And I had 30 people that showed up and paid me $10 to talk for an hour and a half. So I'm like, wow, that's kind of interesting. I wonder if they'll come back next week. So I added more. Then I started doing haunted dinners in haunted restaurants, which is great because you get to eat the food, and we rent the entire restaurant out, and we give everybody ghost hunting equipment to use, and then you can ghost hunt. And then I started doing the bus tours to Gettysburg and to Kentucky to an old tuberculosis sanatorium, and coming down to the West Virginia Pen. So I kind of just snowballed into that, and then investigating, leading investigations, and also doing some paranormal classes as well. So it's fun. It's not your typical job. My kids, I think, were really embarrassed when I first started it out, because they were probably 10 and 12 at the time now, until I paid them to help me. And once they saw that they could make a little bit of money, they really enjoyed it. But I always give back locally. When I do my cemetery walks, I give $5 back, to the cemetery for every person that comes. That really helps them out as well. And as a matter of fact, tonight I have some books for sale. It's the Haunted History of the West Virginia Pen, and they're $25, and $5 will go right back to the Archives Library tonight to help them out as a donation, if you're interested. Also up here, I have maps of the penitentiary. If you're interested, maybe you want to take a day trip or something up there, there's a map of the pen. I also have a list of all the ghost hunts coming up at the penitentiary that I'll be doing. I have flyers from the pen, and I also have some West Virginia penitentiary brochures here from the pen themselves. It has a list of all the festivals that they're doing up there. Yes, sir?
Has there been any government-funded research or anything about the happenings at the penitentiary?
No, there has not been. There have been a lot of individual groups that come. We've had groups that have come from Canada. We've had groups that have come from overseas in Europe that come and they set all of their equipment. And there's been multiple television show groups that have come in and have filmed. But the one thing that paranormal really lacks is a database of some type, a central database to put all of this information in. Me, I'm just one person. I've got file cabinets full of stuff at all the different locations I've gone to and all the experiences that people have sent to me. But there is no really government-funded group or organization out there that's trying to compile this. Now, for me, leading tours in these buildings like the West Virginia Pen, after a certain period, you start to see repetition of paranormal activity. For instance, there's a certain place upstairs at the Pen, and I don't tell anybody about this on the tour, but when I walk them up there and we stand, I can see the look on people's faces, because in this one area of the prison, it feels as if all the air gets sucked out of the room. And it's up by the psychiatric ward. And you can tell people the look on their face. It's like they sense that something's going on, but they're really not quite sure. That proves to me that time and time and time again, there's a pattern of things that happen. And that's what you look for, is a pattern.
Are there any instruments or anything that can measure any of these vibes or whatever?
There's nothing made specifically for investigating the paranormal. We have to use other tools. There is something called an electromagnetic field detector that is a little box that has lights on it, and it's battery operated, and it picks up on electrical energy within about 5 feet of you. If I was to have that box right now and aim it at the projector, the lights would all start going off on it, and that tells me that that is electrical. There's a belief that paranormal energy is all about electric and energy as well. That's why cold spots happen, because there's a change in the temperature around you. It's all about the transference of energy. So no ghost hunting equipment specifically made for ghost hunting. We use cameras, we use tape recorders, we use compasses. A compass needle will start to deviate off of magnetic north if there's a disturbance around it. We use dowsing or divining rods. Sometimes we have psychics that come along, and it's wonderful that they come along because they'll say, hey, over there. And I'll tell you what, when a psychic says, hey, over there, everybody's over there. They're taking pictures, they're wanting to know what's going on. Psychics are, let me say this right, let me say this politically correct. There's only a few good psychics out there, right? There's people that will take your money, just as in any profession, sell you snake oil or whatnot, but there are other people that are truly gifted, that can see what's around you, and when you find somebody like that, you stick with them. I've got a couple ladies that I trust with my life, that I'll bring them in on an investigation, and whatever they say goes. You know, I don't tell them anything about the building, I just bring them in, say, meet me at this address, and away we go. So it is beneficial to find some. And I believe it's a God-given gift, the ability to feel or to see or to sense. And so many people draw comfort from that, especially if you've got a loved one that's died tragically. You can have that psychic give you some comfort with a message or something that they tell you.
Are there other places in the United States in comparison to this?
As far as activity,
Yeah.
oh yes. I would have to say the Western State Hospital is right up there in my top 5 places to explore with the energy. It's the second largest stone-cut building in the world in Weston there, behind the Kremlin. 5 miles of hallways. It's a beautiful building, but there were a lot of patients that were abused in the early years. There are a lot of patients that were put there by mistake and not for the correct reasons. For menopause, some women in menopause were committed there. Your husband could sign a piece of paper and you were taken away with the children. You know, not a bad deal for somebody back in those days, I guess. Lizzie Borden House, sure. The Sarah Winchester House out west. There's lots of cemeteries. The Greenbrier Ghost is a common one here in the state. And of course, in Greenbrier County, that's a famous story. The Braxton County Green Monster. You've got Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum. There was Trans-Allegheny Library in Parkersburg. There's just a multitude of places across the nation that you can go to investigate. There are a lot more than there used to be even just 5 years ago. Yes, ma'am? Age limit on the tours is 18 and over. 18 and over. Okay, well, thank you folks for coming tonight. I'm going to be here for